Why does a single gunshot change everything? The crack split the desert air at Forward Operating Base Vanguard, but it wasn't from any weapon Private Emma Hayes was holding. Sergeant Major Colt Brennan had just fired one round straight into the cloudless California sky, his voice carrying across the live fire training range like thunder across a canyon. Hold. Everybody, hold. 80 male recruits froze mid-movement, their heads turning in synchronized confusion toward the observation tower where Brennan stood, his weathered face contorted with something between disgust and theatrical fury. The morning sun blazed at 800 hours, turning the sand beneath their boots into a shimmering heat trap that would only get worse as the day progressed. Advanced infantry training at Vanguard wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed to break people who thought they were already warriors. Brennan descended the tower stairs two at a time, his boots striking each metal step with deliberate force. 23 years in the Marine Corps had carved him into something hard and uncompromising, a man who believed the old ways were the only ways that mattered. His ribbons told stories of Fallujah, Kandahar, and places whose names were still classified. Every soldier on that range knew his reputation. Excellence through brutality, respect through fear. He walked through the formation with predatory patience, eyes scanning faces, until he stopped directly in front of Private Emma Hayes. She stood at parade rest, her regulation uniform crisp despite the heat, brown hair pulled back in a perfect bun that revealed nothing of the person beneath the protocol. At 5'6", she was notably smaller than most of the men surrounding her, a fact that hadn't gone unnoticed during the 3 weeks she'd been at Vanguard. "You," Brennan said, pointing at her with one thick finger. "What's your name?" "Private Hayes, Sergeant Major." "Hayes," he drew out the syllable like he was tasting something unpleasant. "You think you belong here, Hayes?" "I'm here to train, Sergeant Major." "That's not what I asked." He moved closer, his voice dropping but still carrying to every witness present. "See, I've been doing this for longer than you've been alive, and in my experience, there are soldiers who earn their place through blood and sweat. And then there are diversity quotas that the politicians force down our throats to make some committee in Washington feel good about themselves." A ripple of laughter spread through the formation. Emma's expression didn't change. Her gray-blue eyes remained fixed on the middle distance, a 1,000-yard stare that might have meant shock or might have meant something else entirely. Brennan bent down and picked up an M16A1 that had been lying near the equipment shed. The rifle was clearly old stock, probably pulled from reserve storage or salvaged from a unit that had upgraded to modern platforms decades ago. Rust spotted the barrel like a disease, and the stock had a visible crack running along its grain. He held it for a moment, then let it drop to the dirt at Emma's feet with a metallic clang that echoed across the silent range. "Pick it up, beauty queen." Emma looked down at the weapon, then back up at Brennan's face. "That's an order, Private." She bent slowly, both hands wrapping around the rifle as she lifted it from the dust. The weight was familiar, the balance slightly off from what modern soldiers trained with, but not wrong, just different. She brought it to port arms, the rust leaving orange streaks on her palms. "Now, here's the deal," Brennan announced loud enough for the entire company to hear. "This private thinks she can hang with the best infantry soldiers in the U.S. military, so we're going to give her a chance to prove it. If you can pass today's kill house drill with that rifle, Hayes, then maybe, just maybe, I'll start believing you're not just taking up space that should belong to someone who actually wants to fight." Captain Victoria Sterling watched from the observation deck, her arms crossed over her chest. At 35, she was the first woman to achieve company command at Vanguard, a position she'd fought for through years of being harder, faster, and colder than any of her male counterparts. She'd earned her nickname, Ice Queen, not through cruelty, but through an absolute refusal to show weakness or ask for accommodation. When she saw Emma standing there with that rusted weapon, something like contempt flickered across her face. "This is exactly why integration policies fail," Sterling muttered to the officer beside her, Gunnery Sergeant Rick Tex Morrison, a weapons specialist who'd spent 18 years turning recruits into marksmen. They lower the standards, pretend everything's equal, and then wonder why nobody takes it seriously. Morrison nodded, his weathered features settling into a frown. That rifle hasn't been fired in probably 15 years. Probably shouldn't be fired at all. If it doesn't jam after 3 rounds, I'll be amazed. Down on the range, Emma raised her eyes to meet Brennan's directly for just a moment before dropping her gaze back to regulation neutrality. That brief contact carried something the sergeant major couldn't quite identify, and it irritated him more than open defiance would have. "You've got something to say, Hayes." "No, Sergeant Major." "Good, because actions speak louder than words, don't they?" He turned to address the formation. "Today's exercise, Kill House compound clearance, standard time limit is 8 minutes. Passing accuracy is 70%. I'm personally betting Hayes here doesn't hit 30%. He paused for effect. "Any takers willing to bet against me?" Silence answered him. Not one soldier stepped forward to defend the woman holding the rusted rifle. Have you ever been completely underestimated? Maybe at work, maybe at school, maybe in life. That moment when someone looks at you and decides you're not capable before you even get a chance to prove yourself. Lieutenant Blake Cordova emerged from the equipment building carrying a standard ammunition belt, but something about his expression suggested calculation rather than routine procedure. At 28, he was the youngest officer to achieve his current position at Vanguard, a fact he attributed to natural leadership rather than the aggressive networking and political maneuvering that his peers whispered about behind his back. He approached Emma with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your ammunition, Private." He held out the belt and Emma took it automatically, her fingers registering the weight before her conscious mind processed the information. 20 rounds. Standard load for this drill was 40, half the ammunition she needed. "Sir," she began, then stopped. Challenging an officer's decision in front of 80 witnesses wasn't the move here. She clipped the belt to her gear and said nothing more. "Problem, Hayes?" Cordova's smile widened. "Or are you going to claim you need special accommodation already?" "No problem, sir." "Excellent." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Hayes, just so you know, I've assigned you to Fire Team Delta. They're waiting for you by the armory." Fire Team Delta. Emma kept her expression neutral, but everyone on that range knew what Delta meant. It was where they put the soldiers who'd failed basic qualifications, the ones who were one mistake away from recycling or discharge. The reject squad. Being assigned there wasn't just an insult. It was a public announcement that she'd already been judged and found wanting. Private Danny Torres stood with 3 other soldiers near the armory, his young face a mixture of resignation and embarrassment. At 23, he'd already washed out of 2 specialized training programs, not from lack of effort but from panic that overtook him during live fire exercises. Private Maria Gonzalez, 21, had failed her marksmanship qualifications 3 times. Private Chen, 19, had such severe test anxiety that he'd frozen during every tactical assessment. Private Jackson, 24, had been recycled from advanced training after a knee injury destroyed his sprint times. They were good people, dedicated soldiers, but Vanguard had already decided they didn't measure up to the standard, and being here meant accepting that judgment every single day. When Emma approached with the rusted rifle, Torres straightened slightly, trying to salvage some dignity. "Private Torres, Fire Team Delta leader." He extended his hand, and Emma shook it firmly. "Private Hayes." "Yeah, we heard." Torres gestured to the Kill House compound visible in the distance, a maze of plywood structures designed to simulate urban combat environments. "You're running the drill with us." "Looks that way." Gonzalez stepped forward, her dark eyes scanning Emma with something between sympathy and curiosity. "They gave you that rifle." She nodded toward the rusted M16. "That's not even standard issue anymore." "It'll work." "Will it?" Jackson's voice carried doubt but not cruelty. Because if it jams and you fail, they're going to use it as proof that women can't handle combat roles. You know that, right? Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then it won't jam. Chen spoke quietly from the back. We're supposed to support you during the drill, clear sectors, call out targets, but… He trailed off. But what? Emma asked. Torres finished the thought. But Lieutenant Cordova specifically told us that if you fail, it reflects on our leadership capability. We're already on thin ice. One more failure and we get discharged. Ah, so that was the real setup. Emma wasn't just being tested. She was being positioned to take down 4 other soldiers with her when she inevitably failed. Brennan gets his proof that women don't belong. Cordova gets to eliminate problematic soldiers. Sterling gets validation for her Ice Queen philosophy. Clean, efficient, brutal. Understood, Emma said simply. Let's get ready. The kill house loomed ahead of them, a labyrinth of shadows and simulated danger. Somewhere inside, targets waited. Pop-up threats, hostage scenarios, close quarters decision points that separated trained soldiers from people just wearing the uniform. Emma checked the rusted rifle one more time, feeling the weight, testing the trigger pull, examining the sights that were slightly bent from age and neglect. Behind her, Brennan was addressing the assembled company. Gentlemen, today you're going to witness what happens when political correctness meets battlefield reality, when feelings meet facts, when wishes meet weapons. Pay attention, because this lesson is going to save your lives someday when you're deployed and some quota-filling private gets you killed because nobody had the courage to say what needed saying. Sterling nodded from the observation deck, her face set in grim satisfaction. Morrison raised his binoculars, ready to document every failure. Cordova checked his watch with theatrical precision. And Emma Hayes stood at the entrance to the kill house, holding a rifle that shouldn't work, leading a team that had already been written off, facing a test designed for her to fail in front of witnesses who wanted nothing more than to see her broken. She took a breath, then another, and inside her chest, something that had been carefully contained for 3 weeks began to quietly, methodically, prepare itself for what came next. But here's what nobody understood yet. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimated. What happens when quiet becomes deliberate? The kill house entrance swallowed them in shadow. Emma moved first, her boots making no sound on the plywood flooring despite the loose boards that groaned under Tor's heavier step behind her. The air inside smelled of old paint, dust, and the distinctive chemical scent of smoke, grenades from previous drills. Narrow corridors stretched ahead, lit only by gaps in the walls that let slivers of desert sun slice through the darkness. "Stack up," Emma whispered, and Fire Team Delta formed behind her with practiced efficiency despite their record of failures. Whatever else these soldiers lacked, they understood basic combat formations. Torres at her 6, Gonzalez covering the right flank, Chen watching their rear, Jackson sweeping left sectors. They moved as one unit into the first corridor, and Emma's mind shifted into a mode that had nothing to do with Private Hayes, the quota filler, the woman with the rusty rifle. The first target popped up 15 feet ahead, a hostile silhouette, chest center marked with the distinctive red coloring that indicated immediate threat. Emma's rifle came up smooth, her breath already controlled, her finger finding the trigger with muscle memory that went deeper than Vanguard's 3-week training cycle. The shot cracked through the kill house, and the target's center mass exploded in a perfect hit. "Clear," she breathed, moving forward without waiting for confirmation. Torres blinked. That rifle had just fired without jamming, and that shot had been clean, professional, too professional for a private 3 weeks into advanced infantry training. Second target, hostile with human shield. Pop up at 20 feet, partially obscured, requiring precision not to hit the hostage silhouette. Emma's second round punched through the threat's visible shoulder, a kill shot that avoided the protected area entirely. "Clear," she repeated, flowing into the next room. Behind her, Gonzalez whispered urgently to Torres, Did you see that angle? That's not beginner shooting. I saw it, Torres muttered back, his voice tight with confusion. They entered what the instructors called the nightmare room, a large open space with 6 pop-up targets that could appear from any direction, forcing teams to communicate rapidly or risk friendly fire. Emma halted at the threshold, her head tilting slightly as if listening to something none of them could hear. Then she moved. 3 hostiles rose simultaneously from different sectors. Emma took the right threat with a headshot that shouldn't have been possible with iron sights on a rusty rifle. Spun left. Center mass on the second target. Dropped to one knee as the third hostile popped up behind cover, and her round found the narrow gap with surgical accuracy. 19 seconds, 3 kills, 0 misses, and she'd used only 5 rounds of her 20-round handicapped ammunition. Hayes, Torres said urgently, "Who the hell are you?" Emma didn't answer. She was already moving through the doorway into the hostage room, where mannequins representing civilians clustered around hostile targets in a scenario designed to create hesitation, confusion, second-guessing. Most soldiers spent 30 seconds in this room, their accuracy dropping to 40% as fear of hitting innocents made them freeze or rush their shots. Emma spent 8 seconds. 4 hostile targets, 4 perfect shots, 0 civilians touched. She moved like water, like something that had done this before, many times before, in places that weren't training facilities. "Check your sectors," she commanded, her voice still whisper quiet but carrying absolute authority now. Fire Team Delta responded automatically, their previous designation as failures forgotten as they fell into rhythm behind someone who clearly knew what she was doing. Outside on the observation deck, Morrison's binoculars tracked Emma's movement through the kill house's viewing ports. His hands had gone very still. "Brennan," he said carefully, "you need to see this." "See what?" "Her fail." Brennan moved to the viewing scope, adjusting it to follow Fire Team Delta's progress. He watched Emma clear a blind corner with textbook precision, watched her place a shot through a narrow window gap that most experienced soldiers wouldn't attempt, watched her lead her team through the most complex section of the course with movements that spoke of training far beyond basic infantry. "That's not 3-week training," Morrison said flatly. "That's operator-level movement, special operations." Sterling stepped closer, her Ice Queen expression cracking slightly with uncertainty. "That's impossible. Her file shows standard basic training, no specialized schools, no combat deployments. She's a private." "Then her file is wrong," Morrison replied, his eyes never leaving the scope. "Because that woman has done this before, multiple times, under fire. That's not training, that's experience." Inside the kill house, Emma reached the final challenge, the ambush corridor, a long, narrow passage with targets that popped up in rapid sequence, requiring split-second decisions while advancing under simulated fire. Most teams took 3 minutes to clear it. Some never cleared it at all, their accuracy destroyed by stress and the rapid tempo. Emma stopped at the corridor entrance and turned to face Fire Team Delta. They stared at her, these 4 rejected soldiers, suddenly understanding they were witnessing something extraordinary. "You've been told you're not good enough," she said quietly. "You've been told you failed, but right now you're my team, and my team doesn't fail. Chen, breathe, control your anxiety. You know what to do. Gonzalez, trust your instincts. You see the targets before your conscious mind registers them. Torres, you don't freeze. You adapt. Jackson, that knee doesn't define your worth. Your mind does. Clear." "Clear," they replied in unison, and something in their voices had changed. They stood straighter, breath deeper, believed. Emma turned back to the corridor. "On my mark, 3, 2, 1, go." They moved as a unit. Emma took point with the rusted rifle that somehow never jammed, never hesitated, never missed. The pop-up targets came fast, a blur of hostile silhouettes designed to overwhelm and confuse. But Emma flowed through them like she'd choreographed the dance herself. Left target, right target, elevated threat, ground-level hostile. Each shot precise. Each movement economical. And behind her, Fire Team Delta performed beyond anything they'd achieved before, their confidence building with every cleared sector. Torres found himself shooting without hesitation, his panic buried under trust in the woman leading them. Gonzalez's marksmanship, always technically sound but undermined by self-doubt, became deadly accurate. Chen's test anxiety evaporated in the rhythm of actual combat scenarios. Jackson moved fluidly despite his injury, proving that limitations were often mental before they were physical. The final target popped up at maximum distance, 60 yards through a narrow corridor, partially obscured by a door frame. Emma had 2 rounds left of her 20-round handicap. She took one breath, released it halfway, squeezed. The target's center mass exploded. Silence filled the kill house. Then Torres whispered, "Time check." Jackson looked at his watch. 6 minutes, 40 seconds. Passing time is 8 minutes. Accuracy. Gonzalez had been counting. 20 targets, 20 kills, no civilian casualties, 100%. They stood in the sudden quiet of achievement, these 5 soldiers who'd been set up to fail, staring at what they'd just accomplished with half the required ammunition, a rusted weapon, and a team that had been written off as hopeless. Emma lowered the rifle and turned to face them. "You did that," she said simply. "Not me, you. Remember how this feels." But Torres was studying her face now, really looking at her for the first time beyond the uniform and the regulation neutrality. "No," he said slowly. "You did something to that rifle. There's no way it should have fired that cleanly. What did you do to it last night?" Emma met his eyes, and for just a moment something flickered in her expression, something that might have been respect for his observation. "I maintained it, like any soldier should maintain their weapon." "In one night, you restored a 15-year-old rusted rifle to perfect function in one night." Torres stepped closer. "Who are you really, Hayes?" Before Emma could respond, the kill house door burst open. Brennan stood silhouetted against the desert sun, his face dark with an emotion that might have been fury or might have been something more complicated. Morrison was beside him, still holding his binoculars. Sterling stood slightly behind, her Ice Queen mask firmly back in place but her eyes betraying uncertainty. "Clear the kill house," Brennan ordered, his voice tight. "Everybody out now." Fire Team Delta filed past him, their heads high for the first time in weeks, their failure status temporarily forgotten in the glow of perfect execution. But Brennan didn't look at them. He was staring at Emma Hayes, at the rusted rifle in her hands, at the woman who just shattered every assumption he'd made about her capabilities. "You," he said, pointing at Emma. "My office, immediately." Emma shouldered the rifle, her expression returning to that regulation-neutral mask that revealed nothing. "Yes, Sergeant Major." As she walked past him, Brennan caught her arm. "What game are you playing, Private?" Emma looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried steel underneath. "No game, Sergeant Major. You gave me a test. I passed it, that's all." She gently removed his hand from her arm and continued walking toward the administration building, leaving Brennan standing in the kill house doorway with questions multiplying in his mind like fractures in foundation he'd thought was solid. Morrison came up beside him. "That woman is not who her file says she is." "I know," Brennan replied, his jaw tight. "Question is, what are we going to do about it?" Sterling joined them, her arms crossed defensively. "Nothing, we do nothing. She passed the test. End of story." "That wasn't passing a test," Morrison insisted. "That was demonstrating mastery, operator-level mastery. Either she's been lying about her background or someone put her here for a reason." He paused significantly. "And I'm betting it's the latter." The 3 officers stood in silence, watching Emma's distant figure approach the administrative building, and each of them felt the uncomfortable sensation of having been part of something they didn't fully understand, of having judged someone who was operating on a level they couldn't quite comprehend. Behind them, Fire Team Delta clustered together, their voices excited with adrenaline and newfound confidence. They'd entered that kill house as failures. They'd exited as soldiers who just completed a perfect drill. And in the middle of their celebration, Tor stopped talking and stared at Emma's retreating back. "She didn't do this for herself," he said quietly. "She did it for us. She knew we'd be blamed if she failed, so she made sure we succeeded." The other three fell silent, absorbing that truth. Then Chen asked the question they were all thinking. "So who is she protecting us from? And why?" Nobody had an answer. Not yet. But somewhere in the administrative building, Emma Hayes was about to have a conversation that would begin to unravel 3 weeks of carefully constructed deception. And the real question wasn't who she was. It was why she'd come to Vanguard in the first place. What happens when the mask begins to slip? Brennan's office smelled of old coffee, gun oil, and the particular staleness that accumulated in rooms where difficult conversations happened daily. Emma stood at attention in front of his desk, the rusted rifle still in her hands, her uniform showing no sign of the physical exertion she'd just completed. No sweat, no heavy breathing, no trembling from adrenaline crash. She stood like a statue, and that stillness bothered Brennan more than defiance would have. He circled her slowly, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. 20 targets, 20 kills, 6 minutes, 40 seconds, 100% accuracy. He paused behind her. With a rifle that shouldn't have fired 3 rounds without jamming, with half the required ammunition, leading a team of failures. He came around to face her again. "You want to explain that, Private?" "I passed your test, Sergeant Major." "That's not an explanation, that's a statement of fact." Brennan leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "I've been training soldiers for 23 years, Hayes. I've seen naturally gifted shooters. I've seen talented operators. I've seen people who were born for this work. What I just watched wasn't talent, it was expertise. Professional-level expertise. The kind that takes years to develop under combat conditions." Emma said nothing. Her gray-blue eyes remained fixed on the wall behind Brennan's head. "Your file says you completed basic training 6 months ago. No specialized schools, no deployments, no combat experience. You were working as a technical analyst for the Army before requesting transfer to infantry training." Brennan picked up her file folder, flipping it open. "Says here you scored adequately in basic marksmanship. Adequately. Not exceptionally. Not perfect. Adequately." He tossed the file onto his desk. "So either your file is incomplete or you've been hiding your capabilities. Which is it?" "My file is accurate, Sergeant Major." "Bullshit." The word cracked through the office like a gunshot. "Nobody shoots like that with 3 weeks of training. Nobody moves through a kill house like they've memorized the layout. Nobody leads a dysfunctional team to perfect execution without command experience." He stepped closer. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Who are you really?" A knock interrupted them. Morrison entered without waiting for permission, his weathered face set in grim lines. "Sergeant Major, we need to talk, privately." Brennan glanced between Morrison and Emma, then nodded curtly. "Hayes, wait outside." Emma performed a perfect about-face and exited, closing the door behind her with careful precision. The moment it clicked shut, Morrison moved to Brennan's computer. "You need to see something." I pulled up Hayes's complete file, not the training jacket, the actual personnel file. He typed rapidly, pulling up screens that Brennan didn't usually access. "There's a notation here, buried deep. See this code." Brennan leaned over Morrison's shoulder. "TF Black 72, what's that?" "Task Force Black," Morrison's voice dropped. "That's Joint Special Operations Command, Tier 1 assets, the people we don't talk about, the ones who don't officially exist." He pointed at the number. 72 is an operator designation. Silence filled the office. Brennan straightened slowly, his mind racing through implications. "You're telling me that private out there is a special operations soldier?" "Was, past tense. Look at the date." Morrison highlighted a line of text. "She left the unit 3 months ago, voluntarily separated. then immediately requested transfer to infantry training under her real identity with no mention of her previous assignment. Why? Brennan demanded. Why would an operator with that level of training voluntarily walk away and then show up here pretending to be a green private? That's the question, isn't it? Morrison closed the file. But there's something else. I made some calls, quiet calls to people I trust. Word is that Task Force Black had operational security concerns, potential breach, internal investigation. And right around the time Hayes separated, 3 other operators also left the unit under unusual circumstances. Brennan absorbed this information, his earlier anger transforming into something more complicated. So she's either running from something, or she's hunting something. Or both. Morrison moved to the window, looking out toward the training range where 80 recruits were still assembled, waiting to hear the results of Emma's test. Question is, what's she hunting here? At Vanguard, this is a training facility. We teach basics. We prepare soldiers for advanced specialization. We're not a tactical unit. We're not deployed. We're not. He trailed off, his eyes widening slightly. What? Brennan pressed. We're not supposed to be interesting, Morrison finished. Unless someone here is doing something they shouldn't be doing, something worth sending an operator to investigate. The implication hung between them like smoke. Brennan felt something cold slide down his spine. You think there's a security breach here, at Vanguard? I think, Morrison said carefully, that we just spent 3 weeks humiliating and testing someone who could probably kill both of us before we realized we were under attack. And I think we should start considering why she let us do that. Why she endured 3 weeks of harassment, mockery, and systematic dismissal without once revealing her real capabilities. He turned to face Brennan. Operators don't do anything without a reason. Every action is calculated. Every response is strategic. So what was she waiting for? Brennan looked at the closed door where Emma waited on the other side. She was observing, gathering intelligence, building trust with soldiers who talked to her because they thought she was one of them. He felt something like respect mixing with his apprehension. She turned being underestimated into operational advantage. More than that, Morrison added. She turned your test into a demonstration. Every soldier on that range just watched her achieve perfection under impossible conditions. When word spreads, and it will spread, her reputation shifts from diversity quota to legitimate warrior. That gives her access, credibility, the ability to ask questions without raising suspicion. A second knock. Sterling entered, her Ice Queen composure slightly fractured. We have a situation. Lieutenant Cordova is demanding to know why Hayes passed with perfect scores. He's claiming the test was compromised, that she must have had advanced knowledge of the target layout. Of course he is, Morrison muttered. Sterling's sharp eyes caught the tension in the room. What's going on? What do you two know that I don't? Brennan made a decision. Close the door. You're about to get read into something above your clearance level, but you need to know. He waited until Sterling secured the door, then continued. Hayes isn't a private. She's a Tier 1 operator conducting an investigation. Sterling's face went pale. Investigation into what? We don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's serious enough to send someone of her caliber undercover for at least 3 months. Brennan picked up the phone. I'm calling base command. This is beyond our authority level now. Wait, Sterling held up a hand. If Hayes is investigating something here and we expose her cover, we compromise her mission. Whatever she's looking for, whoever she's watching, they'll know they've been made. Morrison nodded slowly. Sterling's right. If there's a security breach at Vanguard, exposing Hayes could drive the problem deeper underground. Or worse, put her in danger if the wrong people realize what she is. Brennan stood frozen with the phone in his hand, torn between protocol and tactical reality. So what do you suggest? We just pretend we don't know. We play along, Sterling said, her strategic mind clicking into operation. We treat her like any other soldier who passed the test. We stop the harassment. We give her normal duty assignments, and we watch. We pay attention to who she interacts with, what areas she accesses, what questions she asks. And we protect her, Morrison added, without being obvious about it, because if she's hunting something dangerous, she's also making herself a target. Brennan set the phone down slowly. This is going to require us to trust someone we've been actively undermining for 3 weeks, someone we tried to break. He looked at both officers. Can we live with that? Can we live with the alternative? Sterling countered. If there's a security breach serious enough to require a Tier 1 investigation, we're already compromised. At least this way we're part of the solution instead of obstacles in her way. Morrison moved to the door. I'll handle Cordova. I'll tell him the test was monitored and legitimate. That Hayes earned her scores fairly. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. But there's something we should consider. What if the investigation isn't about a security breach from outside? He looked back at Brennan and Sterling. What if it's about one of us? What if the threat is internal, someone with access, someone with authority? Someone who could compromise security, because they're already inside the system. The 3 officers stared at each other, and Brennan felt the foundation of trust that bound military leadership begin to crack. If that's true, he said slowly, then we can't trust anyone, not completely, not until Hayes finishes whatever she came here to do. Sterling's jaw tightened. Then we operate on a need-to-know basis. The 3 of us coordinate directly. We don't bring anyone else into this loop unless absolutely necessary. She looked at Brennan. What about Hayes? Do we confront her, tell her we know? No, Brennan decided. We maintain the fiction. She's just a private who exceeded expectations. Nothing more, but... He moved toward the door. I'm going to give her an opportunity to read us in if she chooses, if she trusts us, if she thinks we can help. He opened the door. Emma stood in the hallway exactly as he'd left her, the rusted rifle still in her hands, her posture perfect, her face revealing nothing. But now Brennan looked at her differently. Now he saw what he'd missed before, the absolute stillness of someone trained to disappear into any environment, the controlled breathing of an operator maintaining readiness, the way her eyes tracked every movement in her peripheral vision without appearing to look. Come back in, Private. Emma entered and resumed her position at attention. Brennan sat behind his desk, choosing his words carefully. Your performance today was exceptional, beyond exceptional. It raises questions about your training background. I maintained the weapon properly, Sergeant Major, and I had a good team. That rifle was a piece of junk yesterday. Even with proper maintenance, it shouldn't have performed that well. Sometimes things work better than expected when you trust them. Emma's voice remained neutral, but Brennan caught the slight emphasis on trust. He studied her for a long moment, then made his move. Private Hayes, if there was something about your background that we should know, something that would help us understand your capabilities better, something that would ensure you receive the appropriate level of training and challenge, this would be the time to share that information, in confidence, between professionals. Emma's expression didn't change, but her eyes, those gray-blue eyes that had looked into his soul during that brief moment on the range, now assessed him with uncomfortable intensity. She was measuring him, calculating, deciding whether he could be trusted. My file is complete, Sergeant Major, she said finally. I'm a private who passed your test, nothing more, nothing less. It was a denial, but it was also a message. She wasn't ready to trust them yet, or perhaps she'd already identified them as potential threats to her investigation. Either way, she was choosing to maintain her cover. Brennan nodded slowly, accepting her decision. Understood, you're dismissed. Report to normal duty assignment starting tomorrow. And Hayes, he waited until she met his eyes again. If you ever need anything, support, resources, assistance, my door is open to all my soldiers, equally. The emphasis on equally was his own message. He was withdrawing the harassment, offering neutrality, creating space for her to operate. Emma's lips twitched in something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Thank you, Sergeant Major." She performed another perfect about-face and left, taking the rusted rifle with her. When she was gone, Morrison exhaled slowly. "She knows that we know." "Yes," Brennan agreed. "But she's not ready to trust us, which means we're either not part of her mission or we're under investigation ourselves." Sterling moved to the window, watching Emma cross the compound toward the barracks. "Then we prove ourselves trustworthy, we give her space to work, we stop interfering, and we watch our own people very carefully." She turned back to face them, because one of them might be exactly what she's hunting. Outside, in the harsh desert sun, Emma walked with the rusted rifle across her shoulders, feeling the weight of multiple gazes tracking her movement. Fire Team Delta watched from the armory with newfound respect. The 80 male recruits watched from the formation area with confusion and curiosity. Brennan, Morrison, and Sterling watched from the administrative building with knowledge they couldn't share. And somewhere, someone else was watching too. Someone who just realized that Private Emma Hayes had revealed herself as far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Someone who now had to decide whether she was a threat that needed to be eliminated or merely an inconvenience that could be managed. Emma felt that hostile gaze like a weight between her shoulder blades. She'd known it would come. The moment she demonstrated her true capabilities, she'd shifted from invisible observer to visible target. The investigation had entered a new phase. The dangerous phase. She reached the barracks and paused at the door, her hand on the handle. Then she looked back across the compound, her eyes scanning faces, tracking movements, cataloging reactions. Somewhere in that sea of soldiers and officers and support personnel was the person she'd come to find. The breach, the traitor, the threat. And now they knew she was hunting them. Let them worry. Let them make mistakes. Let them reveal themselves through fear or arrogance or the simple human inability to maintain perfect deception under pressure. Emma entered the barracks, and the door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous than a training exercise. Sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted, and sometimes that's exactly according to plan. How do you catch a shadow? Night fell over Forward Operating Base Vanguard like a tactical blanket, the desert darkness so complete that stars burned overhead with painful clarity. Emma sat on her bunk in the barracks, the rusted rifle disassembled before her on a field cloth, each component cleaned and inspected with methodical precision. Around her, other soldiers prepared for sleep, their conversations washing over her like background noise she monitored but didn't join. Private Torres approached hesitantly, his young face uncertain. "Ma'am, I mean Hayes, can we talk?" Emma looked up from the rifle's firing pin. "We're the same rank, Torres, just Hayes is fine." He sat on the bunk across from her, his hands nervous. "That thing you did today in the kill house, that wasn't normal. Everyone knows it, everyone's talking." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Who are you really?" "I'm a soldier who passed a test." "No," Torres shook his head. "I've been in the army for 4 years. I've seen shooters, I've seen operators. I've never seen anyone move like you moved, or shoot like you shot, or lead like you led." He paused, choosing words carefully. "You made us believe we could succeed. Fire Team Delta, the reject squad. You made us better than we've ever been in 6 minutes." His voice cracked slightly. "That doesn't happen by accident, so I'm asking again. Who are you and why are you here?" Emma reassembled the rifle's trigger assembly, her hands steady. "What do you think you know, Torres?" "I think you're not a private. I think you've done things we can't even imagine. And I think you came to Vanguard for a reason that has nothing to do with training." He met her eyes directly. "And I think whatever you're doing here, it's dangerous. Because since this afternoon, people have been watching you differently. Not just with respect, with suspicion, with fear." Smart kid. Emma had known he'd figure it out eventually. Torres had observation skills that his panic attacks had hidden from his instructors, but she'd seen them during the kill house drill. The question was whether his intelligence made him an asset or a liability. "If I was here for a reason," Emma said carefully, "and if I was doing something dangerous, what would you do with that information?" Torres didn't hesitate. "I'd ask how I could help. You saved my career today. You saved all of us in Delta. We were 3 days from discharge, and you turned us into soldiers who completed a perfect drill. Whatever you're doing, whatever you need, we owe you." "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, we do." He stood, his voice firmer now. "And more than that, we believe in you. So if you need eyes or ears or people who can ask questions without raising suspicion because everyone already thinks we're worthless, you've got us. Fire Team Delta, all 4 of us." Emma studied him for a long moment, calculating risks and benefits. Bringing Torres into her confidence was dangerous, but having local assets who were motivated, loyal, and already dismissed by base personnel could be valuable. Sometimes the best intelligence came from sources nobody took seriously. "I can't tell you everything," Emma said finally, "but I can tell you this. There's something wrong at Vanguard, something that compromises security. I'm here to identify it and neutralize it. That's all you need to know." "Is it one of the officers? Brennan, Sterling, Cordova?" "I don't know yet. Could be anyone. Could be multiple people. Could be someone nobody suspects." Emma finished reassembling the rifle, her movements automatic. "That's why I need to observe without being obvious. Why I needed to seem harmless until I could establish credibility." Torres nodded slowly. The perfect test score wasn't just to pass. It was to shift perception, to make people see you as capable instead of weak, so they'd accept you having access to restricted areas or asking technical questions. "Exactly. What changed? Why reveal yourself now instead of continuing to play the struggling private?" Emma smiled slightly, a rare expression. "Because 3 weeks was long enough to map the social dynamics, to understand who reports to whom, to identify access points and vulnerability windows, and because Brennan's test created an opportunity to demonstrate competence without raising red flags about my actual background." "But it did raise flags," Torres pointed out. "Cordova's asking questions, so are others. You're on their radar now." "I'm supposed to be on their radar, just for the wrong reasons." Emma stood, shouldering the rifle. "They think I'm a naturally gifted shooter who got lucky, or maybe someone with undisclosed training who exaggerated her file. Either way, they're focused on who I am, not what I'm looking for." "Misdirection." "Exactly." Emma moved toward the barracks door. "I need to check something in the communications building. If anyone asks where I went, tell them I'm running night qualifications." Torres stood quickly. "I'm coming with you." "No." "Yes." His voice carried unexpected steel. "You gave me my confidence back today. You made me remember what it feels like to be a soldier instead of a failure. I'm not letting you go alone into a potential threat situation." He grabbed his jacket. "Besides, 2 people look less suspicious than one. We're just soldiers walking the compound together. Nothing unusual." Emma considered arguing, then nodded. "Stay behind me. Don't speak unless I speak first. If anything happens, you run. You don't fight, you don't try to help, you run and report to Morrison. Clear." "Why Morrison?" "Because he's the only officer here I'm reasonably sure isn't compromised." Emma opened the door into the night. "Now let's move." They crossed the compound in silence, their boots making soft sounds on packed earth. Vanguard at night was a different place than Vanguard during daylight hours. The harsh training environment transformed into something almost peaceful, just the distant sound of generators humming and the occasional bark of orders from the night patrol. Security lights created pools of illumination that Emma automatically avoided, keeping to shadows with practiced ease that Torres tried to mimic. The communications building stood at the edge of the administrative section, a low structure that handled base-wide radio traffic, satellite uplinks, and classified communications with command. Emma had been watching it for 2 weeks, noting shift changes, security protocols, access patterns. 3 people had unrestricted after-hours access: the duty communications officer, the base commander, and the senior intelligence liaison. Lieutenant Blake Cordova was the senior intelligence liaison. Emma and Tors approached from the blind side, where surveillance cameras had a natural gap caused by the building's architectural design. She motioned Tors to stay back, then moved to a window that should have been locked but showed signs of frequent tampering. The lock mechanism was scratched. The window frame showed where marks consistent with regular opening. Someone had been using this window for unauthorized entry, recently, repeatedly. Emma examined the scratches under minimal light from her tactical flashlight. The marks were fresh, maybe from the last few nights. She pulled a small tool from her pocket, something that looked like a standard issue pen, but actually contained picks designed for exactly this kind of work. 30 seconds later, the window opened silently. Tors watched with wide eyes as Emma slipped through the gap like liquid shadow, her body conforming to the narrow space with fluid precision that spoke of extensive practice in far more dangerous environments. He waited, counting seconds, his heart hammering in his chest. Inside the communications building, Emma moved through darkness with the confidence of someone who'd memorized the layout weeks ago. The main communications console glowed softly in the central room, displaying standard monitoring data. But Emma wasn't interested in the main console. She was interested in the secure terminal in the corner, the one used for classified traffic. She approached carefully, checking for trip wires, pressure sensors, or any of the dozens of security measures that should have protected a classified system. Found none. That was wrong. That was very wrong. A secure terminal with no physical security meant either the security had been disabled or someone wanted unrestricted access. Emma pulled out a small device, something that looked like a USB drive but contained far more sophisticated technology. She plugged it into the terminal's diagnostic port, and the device began copying access logs, communication records, metadata that would show who'd used this terminal when and for what purpose. 3 minutes. That's how long the download would take. 3 minutes of exposure in an unauthorized area with no cover story if discovered. She heard footsteps in the corridor, close, approaching. Emma's hand moved to her waistband where a concealed weapon rested, secured with a holster she'd carried since leaving Task Force Black. If this went kinetic, her cover was blown completely. But she'd defend herself if necessary. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A voice, male, speaking into a radio. "Charlie Foxtrot, this is Cordova, checking on the secure terminal maintenance you mentioned. No, I don't see any technicians here. Are you sure it was scheduled for tonight?" Emma's blood went cold. Cordova was here, right outside, checking on maintenance that didn't exist. The door handle turned. Emma calculated angles. The terminal was in a corner, visible from the doorway. No time to disconnect her device. No time to hide effectively. She had maybe 3 seconds before he walked in and saw her. Tor's voice rang out from outside the building, loud with artificial panic. "Lieutenant Cordova, sir, there's a situation at the barracks. Fire Team Delta, you need to come now." The door handle stopped turning. Cordova's voice carried irritation. "What situation, Private?" "I don't know, sir. Sergeant Morrison sent me to find you. He said it was urgent, something about the roster and discharge paperwork." Emma heard Cordova curse under his breath. Then his footsteps retreated, Tor's babbling voice leading him away from the communications building. Smart kid. Very smart kid. Emma had 90 seconds left on the download. She waited, counting heartbeats, listening to the night sounds of the base. The device beeped softly, indicating completion. She disconnected it, pocketed it, and moved back to the window with the same liquid precision she'd used to enter. Outside, she found Tors pressed against the building wall, breathing hard. "He's heading to the barracks. We need to get there first. Make it look like there was actually a situation." They ran, not a panic run but a purposeful tactical movement that ate distance without wasting energy. Reached the barracks 30 seconds before Cordova would arrive. Emma burst through the door to find Gonzalez, Chen, and Jackson sitting on their bunks, confused by the sudden entry. "Fight," Emma said simply. Gonzalez and Jackson, argument over something stupid, Torres broke it up, now. They understood instantly. Jackson pushed Gonzalez, theatrical but convincing. Gonzalez pushed back. Torres got between them, hands raised, playing peacemaker. By the time Cordova entered the barracks, he found a classic post-scuffle scene, Torres explaining that there'd been a disagreement but everything was under control now. Cordova's eyes swept the room, suspicious. "Morrison didn't send anyone." "I thought he did, sir," Torres said quickly. "I must have misunderstood. I heard arguing and panicked, my mistake." Cordova stared at Torres for a long moment, then at Emma, who stood off to the side looking like a bystander who just witnessed barracks drama. His gaze lingered on her, calculating, weighing possibilities. "Get some sleep," he finally said, "all of you." He turned and left, but Emma caught the tension in his shoulders. He knew something was wrong, he just didn't know what yet. When he was gone, Torres exhaled shakily. "Did you get what you needed?" Emma nodded slowly. "I got data. Whether it's what I needed depends on what it says." She looked at Fire Team Delta, these 4 soldiers who just risked their futures to help her without questioning. "Thank you, all of you." "What happens now?" Gonzalez asked. "Now I analyze the data, and tomorrow things get more complicated." Emma moved to her bunk, her mind already processing the implications of what she discovered. Because if Cordova is checking on the secure terminal at night with fake maintenance stories, he's either part of the problem or about to stumble into something dangerous. Chen spoke up quietly. "Do you think he's the security breach?" "I think he's involved, but he's not working alone. Security breaches at this level require multiple people, someone with technical access, someone with command authority, someone with external contacts." Emma lay back on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. "I need to identify the full network before I can act. Taking down one person won't solve the problem if 3 others continue operating." Torres sat on his own bunk, his young face troubled. "How long do we have?" "Until they realize I'm hunting them. Could be days, could be hours." Emma closed her eyes, looking deceptively relaxed while her mind raced through scenarios and contingencies. Could be they already know and they're planning their response. "Then why are you still alive?" Jackson asked bluntly. "If they know you're a threat, why not eliminate you?" Emma smiled in the darkness. "Because they don't know who I've reported to. They don't know who else might be investigating. Killing an operator creates more problems than it solves. It brings attention. It triggers investigations they can't control." She opened her eyes, looking at the ceiling. "They'll try to discredit me first, make it look like I'm unstable or lying or pursuing a personal vendetta. Only if that fails will they consider direct action." "That's not comforting," Gonzalez muttered. "It's not meant to be comforting. It's meant to be true." Emma sat up, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "This is what operators do. We walk into danger with incomplete information and trust our training to keep us alive long enough to complete the mission. That's the job." Torres leaned forward. "So what's our job? How do we help?" "Watch people, listen to conversations. Pay attention to who meets with who seems nervous, who asks unusual questions. You're already dismissed as failures, so people won't guard their words around you." Emma met each of their eyes in turn. "But don't take risks. Don't confront anyone. Don't let anyone know you're paying attention. Just observe and report to me privately. Understand?" They nodded, and Emma saw the shift in their postures. They weren't rejected soldiers anymore. They were assets. They had purpose. They mattered. Sometimes giving people a mission gave them back their dignity. Emma lay back down, listening to the barracks settle into sleep around her. But she didn't sleep. She lay awake, analyzing the data device in her pocket, thinking through connections and patterns. building the map of betrayal that existed somewhere in Vanguard's command structure. And somewhere in the darkness, someone else lay awake too. Someone who just realized that the quiet private with the rusted rifle was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Someone who was now making plans of their own. The hunt had begun in earnest. And in hunting, the line between predator and prey often came down to who made the first mistake. Emma had no intention of making that mistake, but she also knew that confidence could be its own form of vulnerability. In the darkness, she breathed slowly, centered herself, and prepared for whatever came next. Because something was coming. She could feel it in the way the air tasted wrong, the way silence carried tension instead of peace. Tomorrow would bring revelations. Tomorrow would force hands. Tomorrow the careful investigation would transform into something more direct. And Emma Hayes, the operator who shouldn't exist, would be ready, or she'd be dead. Sometimes there was no middle ground. What does betrayal sound like? The data device revealed its secrets at 300 hours while Emma sat in a bathroom stall, the only place in the barracks with a door lock and reasonable privacy. The small screen glowed softly, displaying access logs from the secure terminal that told a story of systematic corruption. Lieutenant Cordova had accessed classified deployment schedules 17 times in the past 6 weeks, always between 200 and 400 hours, always on nights when the base commander was off-site, always downloading information that should have required higher authorization. But that wasn't the worst of it. The metadata showed something more disturbing. Cordova wasn't the only one using that terminal illegally. Captain Sterling had accessed it 9 times. Gunnery Sergeant Morrison, 6 times. Even Sergeant Major Brennan appeared twice in the logs, though his access times were during normal hours and might have been legitimate. Emma stared at the data, feeling the cold certainty of betrayal settle in her chest. This wasn't a single bad actor. This was a network. Multiple people with different levels of access working together to compromise operational security. And if all 3 senior officers were involved, the entire command structure at Vanguard was corrupted. She powered down the device and sat in the darkness, thinking through implications. Task Force Black had sent her here based on intelligence suggesting security breaches at training facilities. Classified information was appearing in places it shouldn't, sold to foreign intelligence services or criminal organizations. Someone was systematically harvesting data from military installations and profiting from betrayal. But catching them required evidence beyond access logs. It required proof of transfer, communication with external contacts, money trails. Electronic forensics could provide some of that, but ultimately Emma needed to witness the handoff, see the transaction, identify the buyer. That meant surveillance, close surveillance, the kind that increased her exposure significantly. She left the bathroom and returned to her bunk, where Torres was awake, watching her approach. He said nothing, but his eyes asked questions. Emma nodded slightly. Torres nodded back. Communication without words, the way soldiers learned to operate in environments where sound meant death. Morning came with the harsh reality of another training day. Emma reported for duty assignment and found herself assigned to equipment maintenance, a rotation that gave her access to the armory, the motor pool, and various support buildings. Cordova had made that assignment personally, his smile not reaching his eyes when he handed her the duty roster. Thought you might enjoy less physically demanding work, Hayes, after your impressive performance yesterday. His tone suggested anything but genuine congratulation. You'll be working under Gunnery Sergeant Morrison. He requested you specifically. Interesting. Morrison had access to the secure terminal, but also seemed genuinely surprised by Emma's capabilities. Either he was part of the network and playing a careful game, or he was investigating on his own and wanted Emma close for observation. Emma reported to the armory where Morrison waited, his weathered face neutral. Hayes, You're going to help me conduct inventory on small arms and communication equipment. Straightforward work, nothing complicated. He handed her a checklist. Start with the long guns. Count every rifle, verify serial numbers against the master list, note any discrepancies. Yes, gunnery sergeant. They worked in silence for 30 minutes, Emma cataloging weapons while Morrison pretended to focus on paperwork. But she felt his eyes on her, assessing, calculating. Finally, he spoke. You're not what you seem, Hayes. Emma continued counting. Neither are most people, gunnery sergeant. Fair point. Morrison set down his pen. But most people don't shoot perfect scores with dysfunctional weapons. Most people don't move through kill houses like they've memorized the target layout. Most people don't lead failing teams to flawless execution. He paused. Most people aren't operators conducting undercover investigations. Emma's hand stilled on an M4 rifle. She turned slowly to face Morrison, her gray-blue eyes measuring him with absolute focus. That's quite an accusation, gunnery sergeant. It's not an accusation, it's an observation. Morrison stood, moving to close the armory door and engage the privacy lock. I've been in the military for 20 years. I've trained with special operations units. I recognize operator tradecraft when I see it. He pulled something from his pocket, a folded document. I also have friends in interesting places who answered questions about Task Force Black. Emma said nothing. Her hand had shifted slightly, closer to her concealed weapon. Morrison noticed and raised his hand slowly. Easy, Hayes, or should I call you Lieutenant? He unfolded the document, revealing a personnel file. Not the training file everyone at Vanguard had seen. Her real file, complete with Task Force Black assignment history, commendations from missions that didn't officially exist, and a separation date 3 months prior. I'm not your enemy. I'm trying to help. Why would you help me? Because I've been investigating the same security breach you're here for 8 months, ever since I noticed irregularities in equipment transfers and communication patterns. Morrison spread the file on a nearby table. I thought I was looking at standard corruption. Officers skimming supplies, faking maintenance records, covering unauthorized expenses. But 2 months ago, I intercepted a conversation between Cordova and someone off base. They were discussing deployment schedules, troop movements, information that could get soldiers killed. Emma relaxed slightly but maintained her defensive posture. Why didn't you report it? To whom? I don't know how deep the corruption goes. I don't know who to trust in the command structure. If I reported through normal channels and the wrong person received that report, I'd disappear before I could testify. Morrison's voice carried frustration born of helpless certainty. So I've been gathering evidence quietly, watching, waiting for an opportunity to act without getting myself court-martialed or killed. And then I showed up. And then you showed up with operator skills and a mysteriously thin service record. I put the pieces together and realized someone had sent a specialist to handle what I couldn't handle alone. Morrison gestured at Emma's concealed weapon. You can shoot me if you want, or you can accept that we're on the same side and compare notes. Emma studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. She pulled the data device from her pocket and placed it on the table beside her file. Secure terminal access logs, Cordova, Sterling, and you, all accessing classified information outside normal protocols. Morrison's face darkened. Sterling's involved. I suspected Cordova, but Sterling. He picked up the device, scrolling through the data. His expression shifted to shock when he saw his own name. Wait, these dates. The 6 accesses under my name. He looked up at Emma. I didn't make those accesses. Someone used my credentials. Can you prove that? I can prove where I was during 4 of those times. I was off base, attending training conferences with documented attendance records. Someone cloned my access code. He set down the device, his jaw tight with anger. Which means the network is sophisticated enough to compromise credentials and plant false evidence. Emma processed this new information, adjusting her assessment. If they can clone credentials, they can frame people, make innocent officers look complicit, control the narrative. Exactly. Morrison began packing, his tactical mind working through scenarios. So we can't trust the access logs alone. We need to catch them in the act. Visual confirmation, video evidence, witnesses. Tonight, Emma said decisively. Cordova's been accessing the terminal every few nights. If the pattern holds, he'll attempt another download. We set up surveillance, record everything, and trace wherever that data goes. That's dangerous. If he spots us, if anyone in the network realizes we're watching, then we move fast and hard before they can cover their tracks. Emma's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who'd made harder decisions in worse situations. This is the opportunity. We either take it or we spend another month gathering evidence while sensitive information keeps leaking and soldiers potentially die because of it. Morrison nodded slowly. All right, we do this tonight, but we do it smart. We need backup we can trust, people outside Vanguard's command structure. I have contacts, encrypted communication. I can request support from Joint Special Operations Command. Emma pulled out her encrypted phone. But they'll need 6 hours minimum to position assets, which means we're on our own until approximately 800 tomorrow. Then we better not get caught before then. Morrison moved to the armory weapon locker. How many people do you trust here? People who could help with surveillance without compromising operational security. Fire Team Delta, Torres, Gonzalez, Chen, Jackson. They've already assisted me once. They understand the stakes. The failure squad. Morrison's eyebrows rose. You're trusting the base's worst soldiers with a counterintelligence operation. I'm trusting the people everyone underestimates, the people nobody pays attention to, the perfect surveillance assets. Emma met his eyes. Sometimes the best operators are the ones nobody expects. Morrison considered this, then laughed quietly. Brennan tried to break you with that assignment. Instead, you turned it into a tactical advantage. That's operator thinking. He pulled out several small cameras, the kind used for equipment security monitoring. These are officially for inventory control. Unofficially, they record in low light and transmit to a receiver. We can position them near the communications building. What about Sterling and Brennan? Are they compromised or just appearing in false records like you? I don't know. Sterling's always been by the book, hard but fair. I can't imagine her selling intelligence. Morrison's face showed uncertainty. Brennan, though, he's old school, believes in the system, but he's also been passed over for promotion 3 times. That creates resentment, vulnerability. We treat everyone as potentially hostile until proven otherwise, Emma decided. Trust no one who isn't in this room or fire Team Delta. Assume surveillance on all our movements. Communicate through dead drops or face-to-face only. Classic counterintelligence protocol. Morrison handed Emma 2 cameras. You position these near the communications building's blind spots. I'll establish the monitoring station in the equipment shed behind the motor pool. That gives us angles on all approaches. Emma pocketed the cameras. One question, why tell me all this? Why reveal yourself as an investigator? You could have stayed quiet, let me do the work, maintained your cover. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Because 8 months of investigating alone taught me something important. You can't fight corruption by yourself. You need allies. You need people willing to risk everything for what's right. He met Emma's eyes. And because I watched you endure 3 weeks of humiliation, harassment, and systematic dismissal without once breaking protocol or revealing your capabilities. That kind of discipline, that kind of commitment to mission over ego, that's someone I can trust. Emma nodded slowly. Tonight then, 200 hours. Cordova's preferred access time. We watch, we record, and we identify everyone involved in this network. And if things go wrong, then we adapt, we survive, we complete the mission. Emma's voice carried absolute conviction. That's what operators do. They spent the rest of the day preparing, each movement carefully normal, each action defensible if questioned. Emma positioned the surveillance cameras during a routine perimeter check, hiding them in maintenance panels and ventilation grates where they'd capture approaches to the communications building without being obvious. Morrison established the monitoring station, jury-rigging equipment that officially existed for vehicle diagnostics, but actually received feeds from Emma's cameras. Fire Team Delta received their briefing at 1800 hours during what appeared to be a casual barracks conversation. Tours would watch the command building, nodding anyone who left after normal hours. Gonzalez would monitor the communications building's front entrance from a position near the latrines. Chen would cover the motor pool, tracking any vehicles that moved during the observation window. Jackson would maintain an overwatch position from the barracks' second floor, his elevated angle providing early warning of approaching patrols. "What do we do if we spot someone?" Torres asked quietly. "Nothing," Emma said firmly. "You observe and report. You don't engage. You don't confront. You don't take risks. Your job is to be my eyes, not my weapons, clear?" They nodded, understanding the seriousness of their role. These weren't rejected soldiers anymore. They were intelligence assets operating in support of a counterespionage mission. The designation changed everything about their self-perception. At 1:30 hours, Emma left the barracks through a ground-floor window, moving through darkness with practiced stealth. She reached the equipment shed where Morrison waited, his face illuminated by the soft glow of monitoring screens showing 4 camera angles around the communications building. "Quiet so far," Morrison whispered. "No movement. Normal night patrol passed through 15 minutes ago. Won't be back for another 45 minutes. Emma settled into position beside him, her eyes scanning the screens with the trained focus of someone who'd conducted surveillance operations in far more dangerous environments. They waited in silence, 2 soldiers from different backgrounds united by shared purpose, and the knowledge that what they discovered in the next few hours could save lives or destroy them. At 2:14 hours, a figure emerged from the officers' quarters. Male, medium build, moving with purpose toward the communications building. As he passed under a security light, his face became visible. Lieutenant Blake Cordova, right on schedule. Emma felt her pulse slow, her breathing deepen, her mind shift into the cold clarity of operational mode. "Recording." "Active," Morrison confirmed. "All cameras capturing, time stamped, encrypted backup uploading to secure server." They watched Cordova approach the communications building, check his surroundings, then move to the tampered window Emma had used the night before. He climbed through with practiced ease, disappearing inside. "That's entry confirmed," Morrison murmured. "Now we wait to see if anyone joins him." They didn't have to wait long. At 2:21 hours, a second figure approached from a different direction. Female, moving with military precision. As she stepped into camera range, Emma's blood went cold. Captain Victoria Sterling, the Ice Queen herself, walking directly toward the communications building with a tablet computer under her arm and the confident stride of someone who'd made this journey many times before. "Son of a bitch," Morrison breathed. "She is involved." Sterling entered through the front door, using a key code that bypassed normal security. That confirmed command-level access. That confirmed authority to be there. That meant she wasn't sneaking. She was operating under some cover of official business. "Clever," Emma said quietly. "If anyone questions her presence, she has legitimate authorization. Cordova's the one taking the risk by using unauthorized entry. If they're caught, only he goes down. She walks away clean." "Which means she's senior in the network. She's protected." Morrison's face hardened. "We need to see what they're doing inside. The cameras don't cover the interior." Emma made a decision. "I'm going in, through the window. I'll position myself where I can observe and photograph whatever they're accessing." "That's incredibly dangerous, if they spot you." "They won't." Emma stood, her movements fluid and certain. I've infiltrated far more hostile environments than a communications building with two distracted officers. Just maintain watch on the external cameras. If anyone else approaches, you signal me." She pulled out a small device that looked like a pen light. One flash for warning, two flashes for immediate abort. Morrison hesitated, then nodded. "Go, be careful, and Hayes." He met her eyes. "Thank you for believing me, for trusting me. Thank you for 8 months of investigation that made my job possible." Emma slipped out of the equipment shed, becoming one with the darkness, a ghost moving through shadow toward a confrontation that would determine whether justice or corruption won this particular battle. Behind her, Morrison watched the screens with his hand on the signal device, ready to warn her of approaching danger. Above them, stars burned in the desert sky, indifferent witnesses to human betrayal and the operators who hunted it. And inside the communications building, Cordova and Sterling bent over a classified terminal, downloading information that would sell for thousands of dollars to the right buyer, never suspecting that their carefully constructed network was about to collapse around them. Sometimes the hunter gets close enough to see the predator's teeth. Sometimes that's when things get truly dangerous. Can you measure redemption in minutes or lives? Emma reached the window of the communications building and paused, listening to the night. Inside, voices carried through the thin walls, muffled but urgent. Cordova and Sterling weren't being careful about noise discipline, which suggested confidence bordering on arrogance. They'd gotten away with this for months. They'd stopped believing they could be caught. That was their mistake. Emma climbed through the window with movements so controlled they made no sound whatsoever, her body folding into the narrow space and emerging on the other side like liquid shadow. She found herself in a storage room filled with communication equipment, spare parts, and outdated manuals. The door to the main room stood slightly ajar, light spilling through the gap along with the sound of conversation. "Don't like how exposed we've become," Sterling was saying, her Ice Queen voice carrying tension underneath the professional tone. "That Hayes situation. Morrison's been asking questions about equipment transfers. We need to accelerate the timeline." "Relax," Cordova replied. His voice held the casual confidence of someone who thought he controlled the situation. "Hayes is just a good shooter who got lucky. Morrison's chasing ghost patterns. Neither of them is a real threat." "You're underestimating them. Morrison's been military intelligence for 12 years. Hayes." Sterling paused and Emma heard papers shuffling. "Hayes bothers me. Something about her doesn't add up." "You're paranoid." "I'm cautious. There's a difference." More shuffling. "How much longer until the download completes?" 3 minutes. Then we wipe the access logs like always, and this terminal shows no evidence of unusual activity. Emma shifted position, angling herself so she could see through the door gap with her phone camera. She needed visual documentation, needed Sterling and Cordova clearly visible at the terminal, their faces recognizable, their actions documented beyond any possibility of denial. She raised the phone slowly, framing the shot through the narrow gap. Sterling stood at the terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Cordova leaned against a desk, watching a portable drive connected to the system. Both of them were completely visible. Both of them were clearly engaged in unauthorized access to classified systems. Emma took 3 photographs, the phone's silent shutter capturing evidence that would end 2 careers and quite possibly lead to federal prosecution. She lowered the phone and checked the images. Clear, undeniable, perfect. Then her foot touched a loose floorboard that creaked with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet building. The conversation stopped instantly. Emma froze, every muscle locked in place, barely breathing. Through the gap, she saw Sterling's head snap toward the storage room door, saw Cordova's hand move to his sidearm. "What was that?" Sterling whispered. "Could be the building settling. Could be someone's here." Sterling moved toward the storage room, her steps cautious but determined. "Check it out." Emma had maybe 5 seconds before that door opened fully and Sterling saw her. 5 seconds to decide whether to hide, to run, to fight, or to turn this disaster into an opportunity. She chose opportunity. Emma pushed the door open fully and stepped into the main communications room, her phone held loosely in her hand, her expression neutral. Captain Sterling, Lieutenant Cordova, working late tonight. Both officers stared at her, shock momentarily overriding tactical response. Then Cordova's hand completed its movement to his weapon. "Hayes, what the hell are you doing here?" "Equipment maintenance," Emma said calmly, gesturing to her work uniform. "Morrison assigned me to check communication gear inventory. I was doing a final walkthrough before signing off on the roster." She looked at the terminal, then back at Sterling. "What are you doing here, ma'am, at 2:30 hours?" Sterling recovered quickly, her face shifting back to Ice Queen neutrality. "Classified work, Private, which you're not cleared to know about. Leave, now." "Of course, ma'am." Emma turned toward the door, then paused. "Should I log my presence in the duty roster for the security report?" That question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. If Emma logged her presence, there'd be an official record of Sterling and Cordova being here during unauthorized hours. If she didn't log it, she'd be guilty of failing to follow protocol. Either way, the moment had weight. "No log necessary," Sterling said carefully. "This is classified work under command authorization. Your presence here is also classified. You speak to no one about seeing us. Clear?" "Yes, ma'am." Emma walked to the door, feeling their eyes boring into her back. She knew what they were thinking. Could they trust her to stay silent? Did she suspect what they were really doing? Was she a threat that needed to be eliminated before she could report what she'd seen? Let them wonder, let them worry, let them make mistakes born from fear. She exited the building through the front door this time, no longer needing to maintain stealth. Behind her, she heard urgent whispered conversation between Sterling and Cordova. They were debating what to do about her, how to handle the unexpected witness, whether to accelerate their plans or abort tonight's operation. Emma walked directly back to the equipment shed where Morrison waited, his face tense with worry. "What happened?" "I saw Sterling head toward the storage room." "I let them find me," Emma said, showing him the photographs on her phone. "But not before I got these, clear evidence. Sterling and Cordova at the classified terminal, timestamp, visual documentation, everything we need." Morrison stared at the images, then at Emma. "You could have stayed hidden. Why reveal yourself?" "Because now they're scared. Scared people make mistakes. They'll either try to silence me, which gives us additional charges to file, or they'll try to accelerate their operation, which forces them to contact their buyer before they're ready. Either way, they're reacting to us instead of operating according to their plan. That's a dangerous game. It's the only game that ends this quickly." Emma downloaded the photographs to Morrison's secure drive. "Now we pressure them, we watch for their response, and we prepare for endgame." They returned to the barracks separately, maintaining the illusion of normal duty assignments. But Emma knew sleep wouldn't come tonight. She lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios. Sterling and Cordova would be panicking right now. They'd be contacting other members of their network. They'd be making decisions about how to handle the Hayes problem. At 6:15 hours, she got her answer. A base-wide alert went out, summoning all personnel to mandatory formation. Unusual, unprecedented for a Thursday morning. Emma dressed quickly and joined the flow of soldiers heading to the main assembly area, where Sergeant Major Brennan stood at attention, his face carved from stone. "Listen up," Brennan's voice carried across the formation. "We have a serious situation. Last night, classified communication equipment was accessed without authorization. Security protocols were violated. An investigation is underway." He paused significantly. "Until this investigation is complete, all personnel are restricted to base. No leave. No external communication. We are in lockdown status until the breach is identified and contained. Lockdown. They were trapping everyone on base, including Emma. No reinforcements could arrive. No support could materialize. And more importantly, no evidence could leave Vanguard until the network had time to sanitize their trails and construct whatever cover story they'd concocted. Emma caught Morrison's eye across the formation. He understood immediately. This wasn't about security. This was about control. Sterling and Cordova had convinced Brennan to lock down the base, giving them time to eliminate evidence and quite possibly eliminate witnesses. The hunt had just become exponentially more dangerous. After the formation dismissed, Emma found Torres, Gonzalez, Chen, and Jackson waiting near the barracks, their faces worried. "What's happening?" Torres asked quietly. "Why the lockdown?" "Because we're getting close to exposing them and they're trying to control the situation." Emma guided them inside, away from potential surveillance. "We need to move faster than planned. No waiting for external support. No gradual evidence gathering. We act today." "Act how?" Gonzalez asked. "We force the meeting with their buyer. We make them so nervous they advance their timeline and complete the transaction while we're watching. Then we document the handoff, identify all parties involved, and bring down the entire network at once." "That's insane," Chen said. "How do we force them to meet their buyer?" Emma smiled grimly. "We make them think I'm about to expose them. We make them believe their only option is to complete one final sale, collect payment, and disappear before I can file my report." "How?" "By letting Sterling and Cordova overhear a conversation that's designed to panic them." Emma pulled out her encrypted phone. "Morrison and I have a meeting with Brennan in 1 hour, officially to discuss my equipment maintenance findings, unofficially to mention that I witnessed unusual activity at the communications building last night and have concerns about protocol violations." Torres understood immediately. "You're going to tell Brennan you saw them. While they're listening, they'll assume you're turning them in." "Exactly, which forces them to move immediately, complete the sale today, transfer the money, and run." Emma checked her watch. "Morrison and I report to Brennan at 800. By 900, Sterling and Cordova will be setting up an emergency meeting with their buyer. By 1000, we'll have documented evidence of the transaction. By 1100, this is over." "Or," Jackson said quietly, "by 1100, you're dead and they've successfully covered their tracks." "That's why I need Fire Team Delta maintaining external surveillance. You're my insurance policy. If something happens to me, you report everything to the FBI field office in San Diego. Morrison has the package prepared, sealed evidence, complete documentation, instructions for proper chain of custody." Emma handed Torres a sealed envelope. "If I don't check in by 1200 hours, you open this and follow the instructions inside. Clear?" They nodded, and Emma saw in their faces that they understood the stakes. This wasn't training anymore. This was real operational security with real consequences. One mistake, one overlooked detail, one moment of bad luck, and people died. At 800 hours, Emma and Morrison reported to Brennan's office. The sergeant major sat behind his desk, his weathered face unreadable. Sterling and Cordova stood to one side, their presence explained as providing input on security protocols. But Emma knew better. They were there to control the narrative, to hear what she'd say, to assess the threat level. "Private Hayes," Brennan began, "Gunnery Sergeant Morrison tells me you were conducting equipment maintenance last night, near the communications building." "Yes, Sergeant Major." "Did you observe anything unusual during your duties?" Emma paused, letting silence build, letting tension thicken. She glanced at Sterling and Cordova, her expression carefully neutral. "I observed officers working late, which isn't unusual, but the timing felt odd. 2:30 hours is quite late for routine work." "What work were they doing?" Brennan asked. "I'm not sure, Sergeant Major. I was ordered not to discuss what I saw. Classified work, I was told. Emma met Brennan's eyes directly. But given the lockdown announcement this morning regarding unauthorized access, I thought it might be relevant to report. Sterling's face remained frozen in Ice Queen neutrality, but Emma saw her hands tighten slightly, saw the minute tension in her jaw, saw fear bleeding through professional control. Cordova spoke up quickly. Private Hayes witnessed authorized maintenance on classified systems, nothing more. Her presence there was coincidental. Authorized by whom? Morrison asked. I checked the duty roster. No maintenance was scheduled for last night. No authorization codes logged. The room went very quiet. Emma watched Sterling and Cordova exchange a glance that lasted less than a second but communicated volumes. They were calculating, assessing, deciding whether to continue the lie or shift strategies. Sterling made her choice. The authorization was verbal, from base command. For security reasons, it wasn't logged in standard channels. Her voice carried absolute authority. Private Hayes stumbled into a sensitive operation that she has neither the clearance nor the need to know about. This conversation is over. She turned to leave, and Cordova followed, but Brennan spoke before they reached the door. Captain Sterling, a moment. Sterling stopped, her back rigid. Sergeant Major. I don't recall authorizing any verbal communications maintenance last night. Brennan's voice carried dangerous quiet. I've been base command for 18 months. Every classified operation crosses my desk. Every authorization requires my signature. He stood slowly. So either my memory is failing or you're lying to my face. Which is it, Captain? The moment crystallized. Sterling could confess, could fabricate another cover story, or could attack and try to eliminate everyone in this room who knew too much. She chose attack. Sterling's hand moved to her sidearm with practiced speed, drawing and raising the weapon toward Brennan before anyone could react. Nobody moves, she commanded, her Ice Queen mask finally cracking to reveal cold desperation underneath. Cordova, secure the door. Cordova drew his own weapon, covering Emma and Morrison, hands visible. Nobody reaches for anything. Emma raised her hands slowly, watching angles, calculating distances, assessing threats. Sterling held her weapon on Brennan, 15 feet away with a clear shot. Cordova covered Emma and Morrison from 10 feet, his aim steady. The office was small, close quarters. Any gunfire would be immediate and messy. You couldn't leave it alone, Sterling said to Brennan. You couldn't just let us do our work and retire quietly. Now you've forced this situation. Your work, Brennan's voice carried disgust. You mean selling classified intelligence to foreign buyers, betraying soldiers who trusted you, getting people killed. Don't be dramatic, Brennan. The information we sold was tactical, nothing critical, nothing that endangered lives. Sterling's gun hand remained steady. Just deployment schedules, equipment manifests, data that has monetary value but minimal security impact. Tell that to the soldiers who died when their deployment locations were compromised, Morrison said quietly. Tell that to the families burying their children because someone knew exactly when and where they'd be vulnerable. Collateral damage, Sterling said coldly. Unfortunate but unavoidable in asymmetrical conflict. Emma had heard enough. While Sterling was focused on Brennan and Morrison was drawing Cordova's attention with his words, she moved. Not fast, not dramatic, just a small shift of weight, a tiny rotation of position that put her fractionally closer to Cordova's weapon. You're not walking out of this room, Brennan said to Sterling. Even if you kill us all, base lockdown means you can't leave. You're trapped here with evidence, witnesses, and nowhere to run. We're not running, Sterling smiled, a cold expression that held no warmth whatsoever. We're completing one final transaction. Then we're disappearing. New identities, new locations, comfortable retirement funded by 8 months of profitable sales. Who's buying? Emma asked quietly. Who's paying enough to make you betray everything you swore to protect? Sterling glanced at her, reassessing. You ask good questions for a private Hayes, too good, which makes me wonder who you really are. I'm someone who stops people like you. Are you? Sterling's eyes narrowed. Then you should know the buyer is already here, on base, waiting for final delivery, which means we complete this transaction in the next hour or we lose millions of dollars. She gestured with her weapon. So here's what happens next. You three are going to walk out of this office. You're going to return to your normal duties, and you're going to keep your mouths shut for exactly 60 minutes. After that, we don't care what you do because we'll be gone. You're insane if you think we're letting you complete that sale, Morrison said. You don't have a choice. Cordova's weapon tracked Morrison's movements. You cooperate or you die. Simple calculus. Emma's encrypted phone buzzed in her pocket. Once, twice, 3 times, the signal from Fire Team Delta. Multiple contacts approaching. Potential threat convergence. We have a problem, Emma said calmly. Your buyer is making their move ahead of schedule. Sterling's eyes flicked toward the window where vehicle movement was visible in the distance. Her concentration fractured for just 1 second, one instant where her focus split between threats. Emma moved. 3 years of close-quarters combat training activated in the span of a heartbeat. She twisted toward Cordova, her hand striking his weapon arm while her body positioned between him and Morrison. The gun discharged, the round punching into the wall as Emma controlled Cordova's wrist with iron grip and leverage born from hundreds of repetitions of this exact scenario. Morrison reacted simultaneously, diving toward Brennan and driving them both behind the heavy desk as Sterling's weapon tracked toward them. The shot went high, hitting ceiling instead of flesh. Emma disarmed Cordova with brutal efficiency, her knee striking his solar plexus to fold him forward while her hands stripped the weapon from his grasp. She spun, raising the captured pistol toward Sterling just as Sterling fired again. The round missed by inches, so close Emma felt the supersonic crack as it passed her ear. She returned fire, 2 controlled shots, center mass. The weapon reports deafening in the enclosed office. Sterling went down hard, her weapon clattering across the floor. Not dead. The body armor beneath her uniform had caught both rounds, but the kinetic impact had knocked the wind from her lungs and disrupted her ability to return fire immediately. Emma kept the weapon on Sterling while moving to collect Sterling's fallen pistol with her free hand. Cordova lay on the floor gasping for air, no longer a threat. Brennan and Morrison emerged from behind the desk, both unharmed. Clear, Emma announced, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Threats neutralized. Morrison, secure Cordova. Sergeant Major, radio-based security and medical. Both suspects are injured but conscious. Brennan stared at her, this private who just disarmed 2 officers with precision that spoke of extensive combat experience. Who the hell are you, Hayes? Emma lowered the weapons, engaging the safeties with practiced movements. I'm Lieutenant Emma Hayes, Joint Special Operations Command, Task Force Black. I've been conducting a counterintelligence investigation into security breaches at this facility for the past 3 months. She looked at Sterling, who was struggling to breathe through bruised ribs. And I just completed that investigation. Outside, vehicles converged on the administration building. But these weren't Sterling's buyers. These were FBI agents responding to Morrison's encrypted message, sent the moment Sterling drew her weapon. Federal investigators who'd been staged off base waiting for confirmation of criminal activity before moving in. It was over, the network was broken, the breach was contained. But as Emma stood in that office with weapons in her hands and 2 corrupt officers on the floor, she felt no triumph. Only the heavy weight of betrayal confirmed. Only the sad knowledge that people she should have been able to trust had chosen personal profit over the lives of soldiers they'd sworn to protect. Brennan moved to Emma's side, his voice quiet. 3 weeks. You endured 3 weeks of harassment and mockery. You let us underestimate you, humiliate you, test you with broken equipment, all while hunting people who were actively trying to compromise this base." He paused. "Why didn't you tell us? Why not bring in help from the beginning?" "Because I didn't know who to trust," Emma replied simply. "Because the breach could have involved anyone. Because the only way to catch a network this sophisticated was to become invisible, become underestimated, become someone nobody took seriously." She looked at Brennan directly. "You gave me that gift when you threw that rusted rifle at my feet. You made me exactly what I needed to be, dismissed, overlooked, free to hunt." Brennan absorbed this, his weathered face showing something between respect and regret. "I owe you an apology for my assumptions, for my prejudice, for the way I treated you." "You owe me nothing, Sergeant Major. You were doing your job the way you understood it. I was doing mine." Emma handed him Sterling's weapon. "But maybe you learned something about underestimation, about assumptions, about the danger of judging capability based on appearance." FBI agents swarmed the office, taking custody of Sterling and Cordova, documenting evidence, beginning the process that would lead to courts-martial and federal prosecution. Emma gave her statement with concise professionalism, then stepped outside into the desert sun. Fire Team Delta waited near the building, their faces showing relief and awe in equal measure. Torres spoke first. "Ma'am, sorry, Lieutenant, we saw what happened. The security cameras Morrison installed captured everything. You saved Brennan and Morrison." "We saved them," Emma corrected. "Your surveillance, your warning signal, your support. This was a team operation, never forget that." She looked at these 4 soldiers, the rejected ones, the failed ones, the ones everyone had written off as worthless. "You proved something today. You proved that excellence isn't about perfect records or pristine performance evaluations. It's about commitment, about character, about choosing to do what's right even when it's dangerous." She placed a hand on Tor's shoulder. "You're not failures, you're soldiers. Remember that." In the days that followed, the full scope of Sterling and Cordova's network emerged. 8 people total, 3 of them at Vanguard, including a supply sergeant and a communications specialist, 5 others at different installations. Millions of dollars in classified information sold over 18 months, deployments compromised, security protocols breached, lives endangered. All of it documented, all of it prosecuted. All of it ended because one operator had been willing to be underestimated long enough to see what everyone else missed. Emma stood on the training range one final time, holding the rusted M16 that had started everything. Morrison had it mounted properly now, displayed in the range office with a small plaque reading, "Excellence doesn't require perfect conditions. It creates them." Torres approached with the rest of Fire Team Delta, their postures different now. Confident, purposeful, no longer carrying the weight of perceived failure. "What happens to us?" Gonzalez asked. "Now that the investigation's over?" "Now you train," Emma said simply. "You become the soldiers I saw in that kill house, the ones who achieved perfection when it mattered." She looked at each of them. "And maybe, someday, when someone else is being underestimated, you remember this moment. You remember what it felt like to be dismissed, and you choose to see potential instead of failure." "Will we see you again?" Chen asked quietly. Emma smiled, a real smile this time. "Operators don't stay anywhere long. We go where we're needed next, but I'll be watching your careers, and I'll be proud of whatever you accomplish." She left Vanguard 3 days later, boarding a helicopter at dawn while most of the base still slept. As the aircraft lifted off, she looked down at the compound where she'd spent 3 months of her life pretending to be someone she wasn't, where she'd been mocked, tested, dismissed, and underestimated, where she'd caught traitors and saved lives, and proven that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. The helicopter turned east, carrying her toward the next assignment, the next identity, the next moment when someone would underestimate her and learn the same lesson Vanguard had learned. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, And sometimes the person everyone dismissed is exactly the person who changes everything. Excellence doesn't require recognition. It requires commitment and the willingness to be underestimated until the moment when it matters most. That's when quiet becomes deadly. That's when shadows reveal truth. That's when the operator nobody saw coming completes the mission everyone thought was impossible. Emma Hayes, Task Force Black Operator 72, disappeared into the sunrise. But somewhere in training facilities and forward operating bases across the world, soldiers told the story of the private with the rusted rifle who proved that assumptions could be fatal and excellence could hide in plain sight. And Fire Team Delta, no longer failures, trained recruits of their own with one simple lesson learned from a woman who'd shown them what real strength looked like. Never underestimate anyone. Never dismiss potential. Never assume that quiet means weak. Because sometimes, quiet is just an operator waiting for the right moment to act. And when that moment comes, the world changes in ways nobody expected. That's the lesson Emma Hayes left behind at Vanguard, not written in manuals or taught in classrooms, written in the memory of people who learned that excellence doesn't need perfect conditions. It creates them,